What does a delayed cargo ship in the Red Sea have to do with the price of French wine in Mumbai? Or, a 19-year-old trade negotiation?
Quite a lot, actually.
Right. Today, we're jumping straight into a high-density deep dive on Chapter 22, covering the historic India-EU Free Trade Agreement. The mission for you listening is to get past the basic press releases. We are mapping out the economic ledgers, the geopolitical triggers, and the institutional frictions.
And, to really grasp the scale here, you have to look at the timeline. The strategic partnership actually started way back in 2007.
Wow, so 19 years.
Exactly. 19 years of complex deliberations, diplomatic standoffs, and, well, shifting models. But it's finally culminated in the EU becoming India's 22nd FTA partner.
Though it's important to clarify for everyone studying this, you can't just flip a switch today and get duty-free goods. The text is locked, but the institutional process demands some strict administrative steps next.
Right, the legal machinery.
Yeah. So it needs language finalization, legal scrubbing, translation, and then ratification by all 27 EU member states and the European Parliament.
It's a slow process, but while those gears are grinding, your focus needs to be on the strategic logic. You need to keep this central premise in mind. How does this FTA balance India's domestic push for Viksit Bharat 2047 against the EU's really urgent need to de-risk its supply chains?
Let's start right there with the economic ledger. The stakeholder objectives here are highly distinct. I mean, India wants market access and skilled mobility, right?
Yeah, and the EU is hunting for reliable, non-concentrated manufacturing and bulletproof investment protection.
So what are the actual numbers on the trade in goods?
The critical numbers you need to memorize. The EU will eliminate tariffs on over 99% of Indian exports.
Over 99%.
Yeah.
That is massive for labor-intensive sectors.
Exactly. Textiles, leather, gems, it's a huge structural advantage. And in return, India eliminates 92 to 97% of tariffs on EU goods.
Okay, let's drill down into specifics. Take luxury EU cars. Anything priced above 15,000 euros. Under this agreement, India drops tariffs from 110% down to 10% over 5 years.
Which sounds like a wipeout for domestic automakers.
Yeah, exactly. How does India agree to that without crushing its own Make in India auto industry?
Well, this is where the institutional safeguards come in. India engineered a strict quota system. That 10% tariff rate is firmly capped at 250,000 vehicles per year.
Oh, I see. So once they hit 250,000, the tariffs just snap back up.
Precisely. It lets the EU tap the premium market without drowning Indian volume manufacturers.
That makes a lot of sense. And we see similar cuts elsewhere. Premium wines drop from 150% to 20%, spirits drop to 40%. Machinery duties, which were up to 44%, and chemicals at 22%, are largely eliminated.
Which is great for India because cheaper capital goods fuel domestic manufacturing. But, the economy isn't just goods. Let's look at services and mobility, specifically Mode 4.
Right, Mode 4, the movement of natural persons.
Yeah. India secured access to 144 EU subsectors. In exchange, they opened 102 to the EU.
And for India's demographic dividend, the mobility framework is the real prize. We're talking 9-month post-study work rights for Indian students graduating in the EU.
But the truly critical target here is the 5-year timeline to finalize a social security agreement.
Right, so Indian professionals don't just lose their pensions.
Exactly. Right now, an Indian software engineer in Berlin pays into a system they can't access when they leave. A formalized agreement ensures those contributions are protected.
You have to push back a bit on the market opening. How does India protect its foundational domestic base, like the real vulnerable sectors?
Few complete non-negotiable exclusions. Agriculture and dairy are entirely off the table. Wheat, rice, sugar, they're fully shielded to protect India's small farmers.
Okay, that's a massive shield. And there's also the intellectual property side, right? Yeah. The EU officially recognizes India's traditional knowledge digital library, the TKDL.
Yes, the TKDL is brilliant. It prevents foreign firms from tweaking ancient Indian remedies like Ayurveda or yoga and patenting them in the West.
Which is known as biopiracy.
Exactly. It's a digital shield against biopiracy. Plus, geographical indications, or GIs, like Darjeeling tea and champagne, get a separate protection agreement.
Okay, let's do a rapid revision recap, active recall time for the listener. What percentage of Indian exports get tariff elimination?
Think about the number we just discussed.
It's over 99%. Next question. What are the exact tariff reductions on luxury cars and over what timeline?
110% down to 10% over 5 years, capped at a 250,000 vehicle quota.
Last one. What is the TKDL and why does it matter?
It's the traditional knowledge digital library, and it stops biopiracy.
Perfect. So let's lock this in with an exam answer framework for the economic implications of the FTA and the keywords they absolutely need to underline.
Underline TKDL, biopiracy, quota system, mode 4 access, and social security agreement.
Got it. Now let's pivot. Economic ledgers don't happen in a vacuum. Let's look at geopolitics, supply chains, and strategic connectivity. How did the Red Sea crisis and the Suez Canal disruptions basically force Europe's hand?
Well, the Red Sea choke point exposed the fragility of Europe's supply chains. It forced a definitive shift in Brussels from pure ideology to risk management.
Because they were wildly overdependent on China.
Exactly, and that realization accelerated the China Plus One strategy. Corporations realized they desperately needed a plus one to diversify risk.
Which perfectly aligns with India's Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India initiatives.
It's a perfect strategic match, and it elevates the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC.
Right, IMEC as a resilient, secure maritime alternative.
Yeah, bypassing those traditional choke points entirely.
I like to think of it this way. If IMEC is the physical bridge, semiconductors are the digital one.
Oh, that's a great analogy, because this is all about tech governance too. Both India and the EU face gray zone coercion and recognize the dangers of technology dependence.
Which brings us to their convergence on trusted digital ecosystems.
Yeah.
There's a stark contrast here. You have the US with its purely market-led approach and China with its state-centric model.
And India and the EU favor a rules-based digital ecosystem. They want technological sovereignty, completely avoiding the extremes of the US and China.
Okay, rapid revision recap, active recall. How did the Red Sea crisis accelerate the China Plus One strategy?
It exposed supply chain vulnerabilities and forced Europe into risk management mode.
And what is the fundamental difference between the India-EU tech approach compared to the US or China?
They are building a rules-based digital ecosystem, aiming for multipolarity rather than purely market or state-led models.
Excellent. Let's build the second exam answer framework. This one is on supply chain resilience and strategic convergence.
For a 150-word framework, again, structure it clearly, the bullet points to generate are maritime security, Red Sea disruptions, IMEC connectivity, semiconductor cooperation, and multipolarity.
And the keywords to underline here.
Make sure you underline China Plus One, strategic autonomy, gray zone coercion, technological sovereignty, and rules-based digital ecosystem.
Okay, so the economic and geopolitical logic sounds perfect, but we have to pivot to the reality check. Despite all these convergences, there are deep systemic asymmetries. Let's look at the institutional friction points.
Yeah, the strategic dilemmas. The biggest one right now is the linkage between climate and trade, specifically the EU's CBAM.
CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Think of an Indian steel plant. The EU says our domestic steel makers pay heavy climate taxes. So when your Indian steel arrives, we're taxing its carbon footprint to level the playing field.
But India views this as green protectionism, right?
Yeah.
Or discriminatory tax.
Absolutely. India argues it completely ignores the principle of CBDR common but differentiated responsibilities.
Basically saying, you industrialized on cheap coal, and now you're penalizing our development.
Exactly. And it threatens to add a 20 to 35% cost layer to Indian exports.
Wait, 20 to 35%? That completely neutralizes the FTA tariff benefits.
It really does. Now, India did secure most favored nation status and 500 million euros in technical assistance, but that fundamental friction is huge.
And what about digital sovereignty? We talk about a rules-based ecosystem, but there's a massive legal dimension here.
Yeah, there's an adequacy gap. The EU views its GDPR as the gold standard for privacy.
But India has the DPDP Act of 2023.
Right, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, and it prioritizes government access for national security.
Which the EU hates.
Exactly. It makes cross-border data flows incredibly complicated.
And then there's the WTO subsidy wars over agriculture. We need to report on this neutrally, as both sides are heavily entrenched. The EU and US are challenging India's minimum support price, or MSP.
Because India uses public stockholding to buy wheat and rice, and the EU claims this breaches the 10% limit on trade-distorting subsidies.
But India argues the EU heavily shields its own farmers with green box subsidies.
Right, subsidies the EU claims are non-distorting, but India says a subsidy is still a subsidy.
Now let's talk about corporate directives and labor asymmetry. What is the CSDDD?
That is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive coming in 2027.
2027. Okay, what does it do?
It forces Indian companies in EU supply chains to share highly sensitive supplier and labor data with European auditors.
Which is a massive compliance burden and exposes proprietary secrets. There's also the mobility asymmetry we need to touch on. The EU just wants temporary circular migration to fix its aging workforce gaps.
While India is demanding permanent, structured Mode 4 access, they don't want their talent used as a temporary stopgap.
And looming over all of this is the geopolitical dissonance. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is the ultimate litmus test.
Yeah, the EU demands values-based sanctions alignment, but India insists on its strategic autonomy.
Plus, we have to note the sheer asymmetry that over 75% of India's EU exports already face tariffs of less than 1%. Meanwhile, Vietnam and Bangladesh have zero duty schemes.
Right. So, active recall time.
Yes. Let's quiz the listener. What does CBAM stand for, and what is the estimated cost layer it adds?
Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, adding a 20 to 35% cost layer.
Next, what year does the CSDDD take effect?
2027.
And what is the core conflict between the GDPR and the DPDP Act of 2023?
It's the adequacy gap over government access to data for national security.
Let's do the final exam answer framework for these frictions and divergences.
Okay, for a critical analysis answer, use a 250-word structure, bullet points to generate. Green protectionism, digital sovereignty clash, WTO agricultural disputes, mobility asymmetry, and sanctions politics.
And the keywords to underline.
Underline CBAM, CBDR, CSDDD 2027, GDPR versus DPDP Act 2023, green box subsidies, and circular migration versus Mode 4.
Excellent. That brings us to our final revision capsule.
Right, let's trace the ultimate cause and effect chain we've synthesized today.
So it starts with geopolitics.
Yes. Geopolitics, specifically China +1 and multipolarity, drives the economic policy, which is the FTA and IM.
Which then necessitates security cooperation.
Exactly. Indo-Pacific maritime stability. But that entire structure faces massive institutional roadblocks.
Things like CBAM and the DPDP versus GDPR clash. You now have the complete strategic blueprint of Chapter 22. Thank you for your focus on this deep dive.
But before you close your notes, I want to leave you with one final strategic question to mull over. If the EU continues to mandate rigid unilateral directives like CBAM and CSDDD by 2027, could this values-based trade approach inadvertently push the Global South closer to alternative economic blocs like BRICS? And if it does, wouldn't that completely undermine the EU's own overarching goal of de-risking from China?